So thank you very much for inviting me here. I'm asked to talk a little bit about what's happening in the IETF regarding infrastructure issues. And after discussing a little bit back and forth what actually is happening in the IETF and knowing that Randy will talk a little bit about IPv6 after me, I was thinking, well, why not talk about the internationalized domain names? I was at another conference yesterday in Amsterdam, so to be really honest, I don't really know how much you potentially talked about it yesterday, but I will give you an update anyways of the current status. So, as many of you know, several years ago, around 2002, we had a number of RFCs published that specifies internationalized domain names. It specified how to map a Unicode string into something that can be registered in DNS. And as a second step, how to encode those Unicode characters in ASCII so we can store them as ordinary domain names. And the design of these protocols were made that way just so the applications could start to use internationalized domain names before any kind of support existed anywhere else. So the specifications were the specification of the overall algorithm. It was also, how come this one is running as well? Okay. So the four different pieces here is the overall algorithm. It is the specification of the IDNA algorithm itself. It is a name prep, which is an algorithm that specifies how to map how to do the mapping of characters, the old ones from the new ones, and then the specification of the ASCII encoding. Okay. So string prep itself defines an ability for people to create profiles and talk about how to map specific Unicode strings to other Unicode strings. And this is something that has been made not only for domain names, but also has been made for example, X4 certificates and other kind of internationalized strings that need to be able to be compared. Because one of the problems with the Unicode character set is that there are many characters in Unicode character set which have different code point values, but there are different code point values, but they are to be treated as equal. But what is equal is something that differs from application to application. And just because now when we are among people that speak German, one of the more classical example has to do with the sharp S. Is that equal or not equal to double S? So the algorithm itself, IDNA, talk about how to convert a domain name with Unicode code points to ASCII. And this is actually the core of the IDN standard. Name prep is the specific profile of string prep and talks about what domain names are actually legal. And note then that all of these illegal or legal domain names, we are still only talking about what we are allowed to use in the protocol. On top of this, you have a registry policy as well. So one example of how to do the encoding is that we have a domain name, my last name Fälström, in this case with lowercase f, because the name prep mapping has already mapped the uppercase f to the lowercase f. If we encode F, A with diaresis, LTSTROM, we end up with XN -- FLTSTRM, etc. You see it on the screen. And this is one of the reasons why ICANN many years ago suggested that as a registry policy, it should be forbidden to register domain names which at position 3 and 4 have dashes. So it is possible to, if it is the case that this IDN standard ends up being complete waste of time, in that case we could come up with something else that uses a different prefix. So XN -- is a prefix that says this is an internationalized domain name encoded in ASCII according to the IDNA 2003 standard. So what happened? During the years in many countries, domain names, internationalized domain names were registered. We have many people from many cultures and many language groups that try to use this, and there were lots of findings that this actually didn't work very well. There were lots of problems in languages. There were a lot of problems with the version of Unicode that we used, which was version 3.2, Newer versions of Unicode were released with new languages and scripts, and the question is what to do. So John Clancy, myself, and Kerry Karp wrote an RFC that was adopted by the Internet Architecture Board and released in September 2006. And this RFC includes a long list of things, both things that are explicit problems with the current IDNA standard, also answers why some issues that people bring up that they think are part of the IDN standard or problem with the IDN standard, why they are not why those problems cannot be resolved in the DNS. For example, a lot of people, when they're introducing internationalized domain names, they also would like to be able to store keywords. They want to be able to store words in the DNS as compared to store identifiers. Because there is a difference when you're comparing things. There is a difference when you look at what characters are allowed. If you talk about words and if you talk about identifiers, that's a pretty large difference. So this document lists a large number of issues where some of them could be addressed technically with an update. Some of them could not be addressed, but this was at least a start. Based on this document, we started an initiative, some of us, some people from the IETF, some people from the Unicode Consortium, some people from the W3C, quite a lot of people from the browser vendors. Started to, we met, we had a couple of meetings where we discussed, okay, what should we do with all of these problems that are listed in this RFC which we actually can address? So what we did was that we walked through this RFC and tried to pick out what kind of things can we change while at the same time be backward compatible. Because we didn't want to force people either to be forced to unregistered domain names that were already registered. We didn't want to change the prefix if it was not the case that we really needed, but if we had to, we had to. We also didn't want to give the registries that started to use the internationalized domain names really complicated sunrise periods when they were going from the old standard to the new, etc. So we walked through this list. So there are a couple of things that we really wanted to try to address. One of them had to do with bidirectional scripts, and I will show you an example why the old IDN standard in reality doesn't work. Well, there are very few bidirectional scripts, for example, scripts that you write from right to left, where the old IDN standard works for. It's also the case that the old standard don't really take into account non-spacing code points, which are code points which are not visible, but you still need them as part of a word. And then some versioning issues. Of course, we wanted to leave Unicode 3.2 and come up with a standard that was independent of the version of Unicode. The Unicode standard at the moment, by the way, is at version 5.0, and version 5.1 will be released late March this year. So one example has to do with bidirectional scripts. The old standard said that if it is the case that a label includes a character that has the directionality right to left, because each character do have a directionality. If one of the characters is right to left, in that case there is a requirement that both the first and the last character of that label has a right to left directionality. But this of course creates problem if it is the case that the string begins or ends with a character which has either no directionality or left to right. In this case, it is like we talk about no directionality. So here's one example. It's a word in the Hebrew script that is written in the Yiddish language. And this is actually quite common, that a lot of the work that were done historically in the IETF regarding languages and also in the Unicode Consortium, it's very easy to work with a script with a majority language that use that script, for example, the Hebrew language and the Hebrew script. But to find the corner cases, you have to work with other languages that use the same script. For example, the Yiddish language and the Hebrew script. Or there are many African languages, and the most peculiar one is actually on the Maldives that use the Arabic script. So one should not talk to the Swedes about Swedish, one should talk about others that use, etc.